Okay. So in this second video, we will continue about the sections of the Jian, the Chinese Jian, Chinese straight sword. In the first video, we were talking about the 9 sections of the visible realities of the sword. Yeah? Basically, Jian Dun, Jian Ba, Jian Yan, Hu Shou, or Jian Ge. Yeah? Then Jian Shen, Jian Ji, Jian Mian, Jian Ren, and Jian Feng. Here, Jian Feng. There's basically like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 sections. So if you don't count the Shen as one section because we count all the sections together, then you also count basically the Kou. This is called the mouth. Yeah? Kou. Where basically the steel is going into the grip part, but this part is of course not steel but iron. It's the same iron from tip to the end of one iron, but this part is made steel and this part is not made steel. The purpose of this, of course, later we will also talk about this. So now the invisible realities of the sword. So the invisible realities of the sword, when you know them, you also know a little bit more about the purposes of the shapes of, let's say, the the grip or the guard, okay, or if this is more narrow or it's the shen means the blade itself is more wide. So basically the purposes of these will come out with the knowledge of the invisible parts of the sword. So the first invisible part of the sword is the point of balance. So the point of balance of the sword is where I put, of course, in this wooden sword now, it's maybe 12, 13 centimeters, I'm not sure here, 10 to 12 maybe, or maybe 10 centimeters here. So when you put the, hold it only with one finger, that it stays horizontally. Yeah, like this would be not, of course, the point of balance. This is the point of balance. So means the beginning of the sword is more heavy and then it gets more light. That's why it's here. If that would be same heavy than this side, point of balance would be also around in the middle. Yeah. So the point of balance is the first invisible reality section of the sword. That determines basically for what this sword is used. Also in curved swords, means like in sabers, yeah, you have this too. You have also this point of balance. And when the point of balance is going more towards the tip of the sword, this means this sword is not used much for parrying, yeah. It's more used for hitting, stabbing, trapping, and using heavy cuts. And the main point here is cutting. Basically, the more weight towards the tip, the stronger is the cutting ability. So maybe we'll do another video of the 12 principles of cutting. You got to have the 12 principles together, that the cutting, like tatami mats or whatsoever, or other objects, that the cutting works well. Without these 12 principles or the knowledge of these 12 principles, it will be difficult, especially the very first 4 main principles about the blade itself. These 12 principles are divided into 3. So first 4 is about the blade, and one of them is also the point of balance, one of these 4 principles. Second 4 principles are about the jianba, the grip. This area, the grip and let's say the pommel together. Here the second 4 principles. And the last 4 principles of the 12 is technique related. So the technique of cutting, the shenfa and the movement and the motion principles. So this is another topic. Maybe we'll do another video about this. So here, point of balance, we said, is the first invisible section. So the more the point of balance comes towards the Parry point here, or let's say the guard. Parry point is just in front, a little bit on the front of the hand guard in Chinese Jian. So this doesn't mean that you only parry with this point. What this means, I can show with a partner better, that the parry point is around here. So if this point of balance comes towards the hand guard more, then this sword was meant or built for parrying and for very fine motions, stabbing, but not too much for cutting ability. So slicing, yes, but not cutting through an arm or a leg or something like this, or cutting through, through the body or the head. So it would not have the same cutting power as a sword, which you can't use very good for parrying, but the weight point of balance is more in the front here, and that would have more cutting power. So you remember in the visible sections I talk about the hushou. In some Chinese swords, also Western sword enthusiasts also figured out that in some Chinese swords this guard is so tiny small. It's not really a guard, right? It's almost that your hand could go over and fall into this blade. It's so small, so narrow. So historically, when you look at these swords with a very, very tiny guard, then you will see that the point of balance is towards the tip more. It's not here. Because those swords were not meant to parry with much. And when you say, what about the opponent's, blade, what slides down that could cut the fingers and so on, the usage of the sword, the techniques were meant, like, for example, Tiangang Jian, one of the 9 styles of Dan Pai Jian or Dan Jian, our Dan, elixir sword system in Mount Wudang. One of the 9 styles that built, or essentially built this elixir sword system, Tiangang Jian, you see very much robust chopping. Chopping movements, very strong. It's not really the sword what we really see much like in Qinglong Jian, for example, Green Dragon Sword, where you have a lot of, step work, body motion, shenfa. It's different. Tiangang Jian, it's very much strong, and the weight of the sword is in the front because you do not parry really. I must give the example now. When you have for example, also in Danjian we have this too. We have a lot of parries where you trap and point, trap point, point, trap point, very fast parries. So basically you lead and deflect the sword of the opponent and point on his arm on the 7 stars, yeah, arm, wrist, elbow, shoulder, whatsoever. But in Tiangang Jian, for example, it is about destroying the sword and the opponent's body. The sword of the opponent and his body. So if you can, it goes also like, the idea is going through armor also. Yeah. So these swords, when you inspect it or look at them, you will see a heavy blade and the point of balance goes forwards. About the blade, not the blade of the opponent not coming to your fingers, the moves are meant that the sword of the opponent does not slide downwards but upwards. Yeah? In all other sword systems, yes, sword, like when we do Jian or like connecting the blades and like parrying, yes, the slide can come in when we do the parrying method. But when you do the chopping method and like hacking, chopping or heavy cutting method, then the sword of the opponent does not slide downwards, it slides upwards. That's the reason that some of the Chinese swords have tiny to none handguard, those ones. And you will figure out when you make the weight, I mean, it must be historical swords that you can check it. Today, maybe this, you know, the modern manufacturers, they make it because of fashion, and then the weight of balance is still over here maybe, yeah? But historically, you will find out when this one here is narrow, you will mostly also find that the point of balance goes towards the tip of the sword more, instead of coming towards the guard. Then, when you have parry swords, then you will see the exact opposite, but then you will also see a Jian, for example. Jian, like this, fending off the opponent's blade, because it's not about chopping now, it's letting the opponent's sword come, basically parry and stab, and within these kind of movements that can happen. Yeah, that's why this shape, yeah, will be more seen in swords where the parry point goes towards the guard more, historically. Yeah, of course, in our days today it can be different. Yeah, because the modern manufacturers maybe just do it as a fashion. So that was the first invisible. Second invisible point is when you do this. Now, don't laugh about me. I mean, I'm sure you've seen a lot of people when they buy swords doing this, yeah, in the sword shop. But I think you never see people doing this, right? So this is to find out the parry point, what I said just now, this one. So when I hold here exactly on the edge of the guard and do this movement, that part that moves the least, it's around here now here. Look, this moves a lot, that moves a lot, right? But around here, this part moves less. So that is the basically point of parry. What means point of parry? Means we can only parry with this point? Of course not. In Chinese sword you have also tip parrying or middle section parrying. But point of parry, or the parry point basically, this means this is the most secure point where you can let the opponent's blade go into emptiness, deflect, and counterattack. So without a partner it's difficult now. So when let's say I have the opponent's blade over here, okay? The blade goes like this. Let's say blade goes like this now, this. Think of this now, okay? Now look. You have this cross. So this blade is also pushing towards me, the opponent's blade. So when I try to do this here, this motion, this Jian motion here, when I try it here, I have a lot of empty space between his sword being deflected and my sword hitting the opponent, because the opponent's sword now also can hit me. Okay? It's very difficult without a partner. But when the opponent's sword is around the parry point here, then it's a close range, close quarter fighting for me. Then from here, whoop, whoop, I'm already in. Because the opponent's sword here is deflected right way out once I pressure and the pressure comes back, I can roll and my hand really leads the arm of the opponent out, or the sword of the opponent. Maybe with a partner in another video, okay? So these are about the parries, okay? The second invisible point, yeah, the parry point here. This is the second point. So it is also important. Then the hitting or the cutting point. Now I can do this here. Some people do it this way, but here, like on the other sword, with this you find out other invisible points. Here, of course, when the sword is not sharpened, yeah, on this sword is around here now. Yeah, the hardest hit with the same power. You start here, it's not too hard. Here gets harder, I feel it, and here gets not too hard anymore. Like here is the hitting point of this wooden tool or sword, okay? So what means this hitting or meeting point? The meeting point is the point where you have the best ability to cut through. So means your motion is delivered the best way at that point. You find this out like this. Like this, you can, look, I show it with the combat ready blade here. Here, of course, you find this too. But with this action here, we find another invisible section of the sword. And these are the 0 knots, the 0 points. What are these 0 points? And that is very important for a good sword to know this. Look, when I do this, a normal sword, also curved swords have this too. When I do this action here, yes, I mean, I will not touch the blade now. Yes, you can also find the hitting point, but what this shows you more is the 0 points. What are the 0 points? When I hit here, you see the vibration, yeah? So basically, this is a 1095 steel. It's not flexible steel, yeah? Like 1055 or 1040, 1055, 1060, they are more flexible than these one. But the way of smithing is done that the edges have around 60 HRC, and the midsection, the spine of the blade, has around 50 HRC. And it is the Japanese, basically, way of smithing, or the way that they took, yeah, for the flex, like that the sword doesn't break too fast. The blade, if it's too hard, like around 60, yeah, HRC. Why they do it so hard? Because it's easier to sharpen the edges, but then it's also easier to break. So they use a method to put clay in the middle at the end of the smithing. Everything is done. Before they put the sword the last time into the fire, they put clay in the midsection on the spine of the blade up to the tip, clay, I mean just before the tip, and with the clay they heat it up to a certain specific degree, and then they take it out and put it with the clay together into the water for a certain moment, yeah? And after that, when the smith hammers, yeah, that the clay comes out and hammers the clay away, so the midsection stay around 10 HRC less hardened than the edge, and that gives the blade all in all a more stability, basically. Because 1095 steel with a high carbon percentage basically is too hard, so it can break fast when it hits a hard stuff. So that is one way of using the same steel, 1095, no mixture, and I mean it is a mixture, 10 and 95, but it is a way how to make the blade more durable against strong hits. Yeah, so the edge still is super hard, so you can sharpen it more, but the middle section is less hard, so it's a little bit more flexible. Okay, so that is one way of smithing, but there are other ways also how to do that. Yeah, so when we do this, why I explained all that, because normally 60 HRC blades, like done from 1095 steel, they are not really so flexible. But because of this smithing method, am I saying it right? I don't know, but smithing method, it has two different grades of hardness. That's why it is a little bit more flexible. So when I do this, basically every sword has 2 or 3 0 points. 2 or 3, look, when I do that, what means the 0 point is the point where it least vibrates. The tip vibrates. This part, look, vibrates a lot. Okay? Yeah, here also. So the first 0 point is around here. Second. Yeah, around here. That is a knot. Then there is a second and a third, or a second. But a good smith must be able to bring at least one of these points to the Jian, the eye of the grip. Jian. What we have explained in the previous video, the Jian. What means Jian? Like the part basically, if we have 2 Jian, means we have 2 nails that go through. So the first one nearer to the hushou is where your hand is located. So because your hand is located here, the smith, when the sword is done, must be able to bring the third 0 point or the second 0 point on this point, because you don't want the shock of the vibration when you really fight steel versus steel. Every hit goes to your hand. You can do this 10 minutes maybe, or 15 minutes. I mean, real, steel on steel, yeah, with real power. So 1-2 cuts, it's okay, but when you go steel on steel and get all the time this vibration to your hand, you do this 20 minutes and then you don't fight anymore, yeah. But for the foot soldiers in China, in battles, of course, sword was not the first weapon, yeah. The first weapon always like arrows, or like bow and arrows, or spear. Spear is the very, very like first choice of weapon for the foot soldiers. Also for the, yeah, I call it phalanx now, yeah. It was the first weapon. And then second, maybe third weapon is the sword. Also for the higher generals, they had sword also from the status. So, but when they go to battle and need to fight with the sword, And one battle day between 6 to 8 hours, 4 to 7 hours sometimes if it's shorter, but up to 8 hours a battle can go, and then they start next day again and continue if the war is not done. So during this time you cannot allow yourself that you basically have a vibrating part of the sword here where your hand is at and fight for hours. You cannot do that, because you do this a half an hour and then that's it, and then you cannot hold the sword anymore. Even you change to the other hand, it will not recover, because these vibrations, basically it's not only about the hand, it goes through, it goes to the tendons, ligaments, your joints, elbow, shoulders, everything will be done within half an hour of good strong hit, steel versus steel, or your blade versus protection, armor. The vibration always will go through, or if the opponent has heavier weapons, it will always come through. That's the why this fourth invisible section of the sword is the 0 knots. The 0 knots, and good swords have 3, but you can also find swords with 2 0 knots. One is here. One is around here and one is here, because in my hand I don't really feel nothing, but here you see the vibration. But in my hand it's very, very tiny, a little bit. This is a sign that the smith did a good work here. You have swords when you can try this sometimes, and then your whole hand vibrates also. So these are the invisible sections of the sword. In the next video we will talk about the third reality of the sword, which is basically not belonging to our world but to the underworld or mystical world, which is called Jian.